You know Waterloo is Napoleon's final defeat. But for a few hours, it was still a race he could have won. Not comfortably, not cleanly, just before the clock ran out. That is the real tension at Waterloo. On the 18th of June, 1815, Napoleon was not only trying to beat Wellington, he was trying to beat the arrival of a second army. If he could break the Anglo-Allied line first, the day might look very different. If he could not, the battlefield would close around him. Most retellings make Waterloo feel inevitable. It was not. 2 days earlier, Napoleon had beaten the Prussians at Ligny. The plan was simple: keep his enemies apart and defeat them separately. That is why one absent commander matters so much here: Marshal Grouchy. After Ligny, Napoleon sent him with a substantial force to pursue the retreating Prussians. If Grouchy could keep Blücher busy, Wellington would have to face Napoleon alone at Waterloo. And alone, Wellington was in real danger. But plans that work on paper can dissolve in weather, roads, and delay. The night before the battle, heavy rain soaked the ground. The field turned soft and slow. Guns were harder to move. Cavalry lost some of its shock. Napoleon also delayed the main attack until later in the morning, at least partly to let the ground dry. Historians still debate exactly how decisive that delay was. The safer point is this: at Waterloo, time was precious, and Napoleon gave some of it away. Now look at the map. Napoleon is in front of Wellington, south of Brussels. Grouchy is to the east. Blücher is trying to bring the Prussians back into the fight. If Grouchy blocks that movement, Napoleon gets the one thing he needs: time alone with Wellington. If he fails, Waterloo stops being one battle and becomes two at once. That is where the gamble starts to wobble. Grouchy did pursue, but he did not stop the Prussians from moving toward Waterloo with the speed Napoleon needed. Messages were delayed. Distances were hard to judge. Intentions were unclear. Later, some argued Grouchy should have marched toward the sound of the guns. Others insisted his orders tied him to the pursuit. Historians still argue over how much freedom he really had. The result, though, is plain. He was not on the decisive field when the day turned. And while that unfolded off to the east, Napoleon kept getting reasons to think he still had a chance. Hougoumont consumed men and attention. La Haye-Sainte became critical. French attacks hammered Wellington's position again and again. The Anglo-Allied line bent under pressure, even if it did not break. There were real moments when one more coordinated success might have done serious damage. That is the part people miss. Napoleon did not need a perfect victory. He needed a breach before the horizon changed. So Waterloo was not really a contest of who was stronger by evening. It was a contest of sequence. Which happened first, a French breakthrough or a Prussian arrival? Once you see the battle that way, every delay gets heavier. Every attack becomes part of a countdown. By the afternoon, that countdown was nearly over. The first Prussian troops began appearing on Napoleon's right near PLANCENOIT. Not as one sudden wave, but in growing force. That forced a brutal decision. Keep everything aimed at Wellington and hope the Prussians were still too late, or divert troops and contain the new threat. Napoleon had little real choice. He had to send men east, and that is the moment Waterloo changed shape. The battle stopped being a gamble and became a trap. Every battalion sent toward PLANCENOIT was a battalion not striking Wellington's center. Every minute spent reacting to the Prussians was another minute Wellington stayed in the fight. The pressure that might have broken one enemy was now divided between two. Napoleon still attacked. He still committed major force, including the Imperial Guard late in the day. But by then the window had narrowed sharply. Wellington's army had held on long enough. The Prussians were no longer a threat in the distance. They were part of the battlefield itself. Once the Guard was repulsed, the mental center of the French army gave way with it. Retreat became collapse. Grouchy, still away from Waterloo, could no longer affect the result. So, could the battle have gone differently? Plausibly, yes. If the Prussians had been delayed longer. If Grouchy had fixed them more effectively. If Napoleon had gained even one more useful hour. In those conditions, Wellington might have faced a much more dangerous end to the day. That is not the same as saying Napoleon certainly wins. But it does mean Waterloo was not destiny. It was timing, mud, distance, orders, and a vanishing window in the afternoon. And that is what makes it feel so modern. Not a clean legend, but a close call where the margin was real, and then suddenly gone.